The call comes at 2:17 in the morning. You've been asleep for maybe 3 hours. Your phone doesn't ring at 2 a.m. unless something has gone badly wrong. You know this because you've been doing this job for 11 years. You pick up. Your supervisor's voice is steady, but there's something underneath it, a tightness. We have a situation at Riverside Medical Center. Third floor, one suspect, 7 hostages. He's armed, he's asking for you specifically. And he says if anyone else comes through that door, someone dies. You are a hostage negotiator. This is what the next 8 hours feel like. Your name is not important right now. What matters is what you do on the drive over. You don't think about the hostages yet. You can't afford to. The moment you start imagining their faces, imagining who they are, you lose the clinical distance that keeps you useful. It sounds cold. It is cold. It's also the only way this works. Instead, you run the information. One suspect, unknown motive, knows your name, which means he's either researched you or he's encountered you before. 7 hostages, which means he had a plan coming in. Armed with something, though nobody's confirmed what. Third floor, which means he controls the exits to that corridor. This wasn't spontaneous. That matters more than most people outside this field realize. Spontaneous situations are driven by emotion in real time, which means they shift fast and often escalate without warning. Planned situations are driven by a grievance that's been building for a while, which means the person inside that room has been carrying this weight long enough that they probably want to talk about it. They planned the entry. They didn't necessarily plan the exit. That's your door. You pull up behind the command vehicle at 2:44 a.m. Your supervisor walks you through it in under 2 minutes. The suspect's name is Daniel Reeves, 43 years old. His wife, Catherine, was admitted to that hospital 6 weeks ago. She died there 4 days ago. Wrongful death suit dismissed 2 weeks after that. Daniel showed up tonight with a firearm, walked past the nurse's station on the 3rd floor, and locked himself in a patient room with 7 people inside. He asked for you by name. He said, "Get me the negotiator, the real one." You've read about cases like this. You've worked cases adjacent to this. A man who lost someone, who watched the system fail him, who decided the only thing left was noise. But Daniel Reeves doesn't want to die. If he wanted to die, he wouldn't have asked for a negotiator. That's the thing nobody out here seems to have processed yet. The SWAT commander wants a breach window within 30 minutes. Standard protocol for an armed suspect in a medical facility. You tell him no. He pushes back. You've had this exact conversation on 4 separate scenes over the past 6 years, and it always goes the same way. He tells you there's a risk assessment. You tell him the risk of action right now is higher than the risk of patience. He doesn't fully believe you. He complies anyway because your record says he should. "Give me 2 hours," you say. "If I haven't moved this forward in 2 hours, you'll have what you need." You take the phone that links to the room and you walk toward the building alone. There's a technique they teach in hostage negotiation training. It's called active listening, and it sounds simple until you try to use it while your heart is doing something complicated in your chest. The whole job for the first hour is making the person on the other side feel heard, not arguing, not solving problems, just listening, like it's the only thing in the world you know how to do. You dial the room. He picks up on the 4th ring and doesn't say anything. "Daniel," you say. "My name is—" "I know who you are," he says. His voice is flat, not angry, just emptied out. "I read about you. The situation in 2019. The one at the school." You tell him you remember it. You tell him you're glad he asked for you specifically. Because it means he wants to talk. He says nothing then. "She was 38. Did they tell you that?" You say you know. They left her in a hallway for 4 hours. There was a form missing. A form. And by the time someone found it, the window was gone. This is the moment you've been trained for, and it never gets easier. Because he's right. And you know he's right. And you cannot say that, not yet, because agreeing right now feels like fuel on a fire. So instead, you say, "Tell me about Catherine." A beat, then another. And then Daniel Reeves starts talking. For 22 minutes, you listen. You ask small questions. How long were you together? 17 years. What did she do for work? She taught primary school. Third grade. She used to bring home these drawings the kids made and put them on the fridge, even though their own kids were grown and gone. You're not building a rapport with Daniel Reeves because the training manual says to. You're doing it because there is a real man in that room who is drowning, and you are the only rope. That changes at 3:41 a.m. A woman's voice comes through the phone, strained but controlled, like someone who has been trying very hard to hold it together. Please, I have 2 children. Daniel comes back on. His voice has changed, tighter now. Something's happened in the room. One of them tried to move toward the door. I need you to tell them to stop doing that. You tell Daniel you hear him. You tell him you'll need to speak with the people in the room briefly to explain the situation, and you ask if that's okay. He says yes. You ask each person in the room, one by one, to confirm they're physically okay. 6 voices say yes. One, an older man, says he has a heart condition and needs medication that's in the nurse's station down the hall. This is the first thing you can offer him, something concrete. A gesture that costs nothing but gives him the appearance of control. Daniel, the man in the room with you. His name is Gerald. He needs medication. I can have someone bring it to the door and leave it there. You don't have to open the door. I'm not sending anyone in. What do you think? 37 seconds of silence. Okay, Daniel says. The medication gets delivered at 4:06 a.m. Daniel opens the door, takes it, closes the door. Nobody gets hurt. But this isn't over. It's just getting harder. By 5:15 a.m., Daniel has been in that room for almost 3 hours. Knowing the initial adrenaline that got him here is starting to metabolize. And that's the most dangerous window. Not the beginning, when people are running on anger and momentum. The middle, when exhaustion sets in and the mind starts calculating what happens next. You've made 4 small asks, and he's granted 3 of them. Release of the medication, a bottle of water for each person in the room, and a request to let an elderly nurse sit against the wall rather than the floor. He said no to releasing anyone yet. That pattern, 3 yeses and 1 no, is actually a good sign. It means Daniel is still in dialogue. It means some part of him is still weighing things rather than just reacting. The moment someone stops saying yes to anything at all is the moment the situation shifts from tense to critical. You've been feeding him a sense of control in small doses. Every yes he gives you is a yes he chose, and every choice anchors him slightly more to the possibility of more choices. That's the architecture of it, even if it doesn't feel like architecture when you're sitting in a flickering fluorescent corridor at 5 in the morning with coffee that went cold an hour ago. But at 5:22 a.m., something shifts. One of the hostages, a nurse named Priya, has a fiancé. Someone leaked her name to a local news station. The news station put it on the air. The fiancé saw it and drove to the hospital. Daniel sees the news helicopter on the TV mounted to the wall in the room. He calls you. Why is there a helicopter? You tell him you're handling it. You tell him nothing has changed on your end. Nas, you tell him you're still just the 2 of you having a conversation. You told me this was contained, he says. I told you I was focused on you and me. I still am. The helicopter isn't in this corridor. He says nothing then. I want to talk to the hospital administrator. I want someone to admit what they did to Catherine, on camera. This is what negotiators call an escalating demand. The goalposts moved. Either he's testing to see if you'll break, or he's genuinely recalibrating what he needs to feel like this meant something. You've seen both. You still can't tell which this is. The SWAT commander is already moving toward you. He's getting agitated. We have a window opening up. Not yet, you say. Your 2 hours are up. I know. Give me 30 more minutes. 20, he says. You go back to the corridor phone. You've been doing this job for 11 years. You've had 100 versions of this moment. And every time, you hit a point where the script runs out and you have to make a call that nobody trained you for. This is that point. What Daniel's asking for on the surface is a confession from the hospital administrator. But that's not what he actually needs. You know the difference because you've sat in enough chairs, outside enough locked doors, to understand that the stated demand is almost never the real one. The real one is buried under it, sometimes weeks deep, sometimes a lifetime. You call Daniel back. Daniel, I want to tell you something and I need you to hear it without hanging up. A pause. Catherine's case was wrong. What happened to her was wrong. That's not me trying to manage you. Why, that's me telling you what I actually think. Then why didn't anyone else say that, he says? And his voice is different now. Cracked. Real. I don't know, you say. But I'm saying it now. And I need you to hear the next part, too. The people in that room didn't do this to Catherine, you say. You know that. Gerald, the man with the heart condition. He's been a nurse for 31 years. He was probably down the hall trying to save someone else when Catherine was waiting. Silence. Priya, she's 26. Her fiancé is outside right now. She wasn't there when it happened. I'm not asking you to forgive the system tonight. I'm asking you not to take it out on people who are just as caught in that system as Catherine was. What you don't say out loud is this. If Daniel hurts someone in that room, it doesn't end with a camera and an apology. It ends with SWAT and Daniel not walking out of that building. You know this. You need him to arrive at it himself. There's a long silence, long enough that you check the line is still connected. It is. You can hear him breathing. You've had silences like this before. The ones where you know something is shifting inside the room, but you can't see it. You've learned to resist the impulse to fill them. The silence isn't a problem. The silence is the person on the other end actually thinking. Interrupting it is the mistake. So you wait. 41 seconds of quiet. Then you hear something you weren't expecting. Not words. Daniel exhales. Slowly. The kind of breath that a person takes when they've been holding something for a very long time. At 6:08 a.m., Daniel speaks. See, she would hate this. She would absolutely hate this, he says again. And you can hear something breaking loose in his voice. Not anger, grief. The kind that's been sitting under pressure for weeks, waiting. Tell me about that, you say. For 11 minutes, Daniel talks about Catherine. Not about the hospital. Not about the lawsuit. About her. About the way she laughed at her own jokes before she got to the punchline. About how she kept a list of every student she'd ever taught. About how she made him coffee every morning, even though she didn't drink it herself, just because she knew he needed it to be a real person before 8 a.m. You don't rush him. You don't redirect him toward the exit. You let him grieve. 11 years of doing this job and nobody has ever asked you what it costs. What it actually costs to sit in a corridor at 6 in the morning holding a phone, carrying someone else's grief, until they can pick it back up themselves. You've never figured out a clean answer. But you know the work matters. You know because you've watched it work. The negotiation at its core is not about getting someone to do what you want. It's about giving them somewhere to put down what they're carrying long enough to think clearly. Not tactics, not psychology tricks. Just creating enough space for a human being to take a breath. Daniel took that breath at 6:17 a.m. At 6:21 a.m., you ask Daniel a question you've been holding back for 4 hours. What do you want to happen when this is over? A long pause. I don't know, he says. Yes, you do, you say. Not what you planned, what you actually want. Another pause. Much longer. But then, I want someone to remember her name. Daniel, you say. I will remember her name, I promise you that. And I'm going to ask you to do something for me in return. I need you to let those people go home, you say. Starting with Gerald. He needs to be checked out by a doctor, and he can't do that in that room. Silence on the line. 8 seconds. Feels like 8 minutes. Then what? Daniel says. Then we talk about what comes next. Together. I'll be right here. At 6:31 a.m., the door to room 304 opens. Gerald comes out first. He's moving slowly, one hand on the wall. A nurse from the response team meets him immediately at the end of the corridor and takes his arm. Then, 2 more nurses come through, then a hospital administrator who looks like he hasn't fully processed what just happened to his morning. And then a patient who'd been in that room for a scheduled procedure and had no idea any of this was happening when he sat down in the waiting area at 2 a.m. Then Priya. 2 people remain in the room. Daniel and a man named Thomas, a hospital security guard who told Daniel 3 hours ago, quietly, that he was sorry about his wife. Daniel let him say it. That moment mattered. even if nobody logged it in a report. Thomas walks out at 6:38 a.m. He pauses in the doorway for just a second, then keeps moving. You don't know what passed between them in that room over the past 4 hours, and you probably never will. You put the phone down and walk to the door. The walk takes about 12 seconds. You've done longer ones. You focus on your breathing, on keeping your posture open, on the expression on your face, because the moment that door opens, what Daniel sees in the first 2 seconds matters more than anything you say. You knock twice. The door opens, and Daniel Reeves is standing there with a firearm at his side, pointed at the floor, and his face is something that doesn't have a clean word for it. Not surrender, not relief. Something older than either of those. The face of someone who has run completely out of road and is only just now looking up to see where they are. You hold out your hand. Not for the weapon. Just your hand. He looks at it for a long moment. Then, he takes it. Officers move in quickly and professionally, and Daniel doesn't resist. He's placed in handcuffs and walked down the corridor. As he passes you, he says one word, Catherine, and you say it back. 8 hours and 24 minutes. 7 people home safely. 1 man in custody. That K form was filed that morning by a hospital administrator, voluntarily officially acknowledging a failure in Catherine Reeves's care protocol. It wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't a headline. It was a piece of paper in a folder. Daniel Reeves pled guilty to 7 counts of unlawful confinement. His public defender presented the grief mitigation documentation. He was sentenced to 3 years. He'll be out in 2. You kept your promise. If this one stayed with you, click the video on screen, because the story doesn't always end this cleanly.